Okay, right. Welcome to our next session, which is asking the question, is quantum the new paradigm? And before we get into it, I'm just going to set the scene a little bit with a short introduction, and I'll explain the context for sort of why we've decided to program this session this year. So, to speak about culture today is inevitably to speak about technology. Now, over the years of researching, writing, discussing, making and working with my wonderful partner Hannah, we've begun to notice that it is not necessarily any one technology in and of itself that we find exciting, nor any particular aesthetic or communicative paradigm that these technologies may spawn. What actually interests us, to paraphrase Cream Projects, is locating and naming the conditions that give rise to new cultures. And these cultures are now so often technologically propelled. And we try to understand the present by tracing and mapping the emergent infrastructures where culture and technology meet. Now, over the years, the Global Art Forum has served as both telescope and compass for such intersections, most recently in the form of discussions around AI or neural media, the metaverse, blockchain, and Web3, to name but a few. So our next session about quantum computing offers an anticipatory glimpse into a domain of technological development and the fundamental scientific theories underpinning that development, which shows promise of being the next significant technological and cultural inflection point. So here's the origin story. Off the back of a chance encounter at last year's Global Art Forum, in June I was asked to join Moth, a quantum technology startup developing applications for the next generation of creative technology and media. Since then, together with Moth's co-founder Harry Kumar, and Harry's proud father is in the audience today, and Harry's incredibly gutted that he couldn't be here to join us. Together with Harry, I have led the area of the company that facilitates artistic experimentations with quantum computing, as well as explorations of quantum theory, what we might term quantum-inspired works. In parallel to this, we are continuing to construct a curatorial framework of quantum culture, speculating on the emergent forms, typologies, and methodologies arising from quantum computing and, more broadly, quantum thinking. In 2025, we're approximately 1/3 of the way through 2025, which is the UNESCO-designated International Year of Quantum, marking 100 years since quantum mechanics emerged as perhaps the most counterintuitive framework in modern science. Quantum phenomena such as superposition, entanglement, non-locality, and uncertainty reveal a microscopic world dictated by laws that defy our macroscopic intuitions about reality, and which offer a basis for a new epoch of technological development. Late last year, Google unveiled its new quantum chip, Willow, claiming that it could solve problems that would take the world's fastest classical supercomputer 10 septillion years to complete. This announcement captivated the public, filled headlines, and fueled speculation, signaling a phased transition in quantum technology's move into the collective consciousness. Whilst this phased transition unfolds, quantum computing, as it stands today, is still largely a specialist technical domain, with the roadmaps towards technological maturity ranging wildly depending on who you ask. One of the things that Moth want to do is to de-silo quantum, both computing and the cultural mobilization of the underlying theory. And we want to do this in the context of contemporary culture. So with this in mind, the first project that I commissioned in my then new role was to bring on board internet folklorist, cultural weather vane, artist researcher, another internet meme queen, and possibly the closest thing to the platonic ideal of a GAF panelist, Günseli Yalçinkaya. And Moth brought her on as an affiliate researcher to spend 6 months looking into speculative conceptions and historical touchpoints of quantum culture. And this will take its final form as a video essay. And it is this research in progress that Günseli will be sharing with us shortly. Before this, though, we are beyond thrilled to have interdisciplinary scientist Konstantinos Meichanetzidis, and I really, really hope you accept my sincerest apologies for butchering your name before. We have Konstantinos joining us to help paint a picture of where quantum computing is at today, where it could be in the coming years, and just what the implications of quantum physics actually are. And we're going to do that all in 10 minutes. As I said, Konstantinos is an interdisciplinary scientist working at Quantinuum, integrating quantum computing and AI and designing quantum algorithms to solve hard problems in mathematics and the natural sciences. In parallel, Konstantinos is also a highly, highly cherished advisor to Moth. Please give them both a warm welcome. So, we're gonna break it down. What is quantum computing, Konstantinos, and how is it different from normal computing?
Hello. First of all, thank you for inviting me to be here. It's an honor. And yeah, let's do this simply. So computing is about using theory we understand about the world. We have explained it, okay? Now we use that, we use physics to control the universe. So we take physical systems, we make them store and process information for us. We make them work for us. And we do this with computers. We are used to it. It was magic. You know, we make chips out of sand and we make it think. It was magic. Now it's trivial. We all have a computer in our pocket. But physics actually doesn't stop with classical physics. The fundamental layer of reality, as far as we know, operates with the laws of quantum physics. And as Declan said, it's counterintuitive. We are not evolved to understand it. We get used to it, as Feynman said, with more and more friction and working with a subject. You get even intuitions about it. And so quantum computing is about harnessing the computational power lying there, down there in the fundamental layer of reality, and making use of it to solve problems that we cannot solve otherwise. Asterisk, it would take much, much longer to solve them using classical computers. It's not that they are in principle impossible, but practically they are impossible because you would have to wait much, much longer. So quantum computers, in one sentence, are something we want to build to solve some problems that we know theory promises us they can solve faster than otherwise.
Brilliant. And maybe we could talk about and just give a kind of mise-en-scene of what sort of things will quantum computing, or what sort of things does quantum computing purport to have affordances in? Like, what will it be good at?
Okay, so quantum computing was proposed as an idea by Feynman and also Manin, roughly at the same time in the 80s. And the idea was very simple. Simulating quantum systems like molecules in chemistry or materials in condensed matter physics, it's difficult to do with classical computers because the memory requirements or the time you have to spend in terms of computational resources scales too fast. So you run out of memory, you run out of time, so you have to go with huge supercomputers, and even they cannot handle the high dimensional spaces you have to process to simulate quantum systems. So the idea is very simple. You take quantum systems, you control them, you call it a quantum computer because, as I said before, a computer is a physical system you can control and have it do what you want it to do. So a quantum computer is useful when you want to simulate quantum systems like molecules, materials, and so on. And then there are other problems that don't seem quantum native, let's say, but in a mind-blowing, weird way they are. So the first one was factoring integers. You know, I give the computer 15, it spits out 3 and 5, right? So 3 times 5 is 15. So this problem is very hard. The best algorithms we have classically, they scale very badly. And a quantum computer can do this faster. So Peter Shor introduced his famous algorithm, and since the 90s, this has been like a paradigmatic application of quantum computing that is not about simulating quantum systems. And then there are other ones, weird ones in knot theory, which is something I worked on recently, and we computed the classical and quantum resources required to solve this problem, and identifying the largest problem sizes that you have to go to see the quantum advantage or quantum supremacy kick in. This is the regime after which, the problem size after which it's worth it to switch to the quantum computer. So the classical resources struggle too much, and then the time to solution or energy consumption becomes lower on the quantum computer, so it's worth switching to that computational back end.
Do you feel like, is quantum computing all about faster? You mentioned the word faster. Is it, or are there some aspects of it that are about different?
So you know this meme with a bell curve, with a low IQ on one end, high IQ, and then in the middle, oh, it's complicated, blah blah blah. So in the 90s, we used to say quantum speed up. So that's like the low IQ end. But the high IQ end is also, it's just about speed up. Because at the end of the day, a computational scientist or whoever uses a quantum computer just as a user, even if they don't know exactly how it works in its full intricacy, all they care about is, I want the solution to my problem and I want it faster, as fast as possible. So at the end of the day is, where is the solution to my problem to this accuracy? I have this time budget, this energy budget. I want my solution. What do I need? What do I use? Do I use the supercomputer or do I use this quantum computer? What are the specs of this one? What are the specs of this one? Just, you know, being very practical about it.
Amazing, thank you. I think one thing that will be like quite possibly, you know, when we think about bleep blue technology, we're going to think immediately of AI, and it'd be interesting to, maybe you could speak for a short while on explaining how quantum computing relates to AI. It's not the same thing, but how will those things interact with each other? And maybe how have they interacted with each other already?
Okay, so that's quite a cool question. It has layers. So first, the technological layer. Both are technologies you can use. You start from there, and the idea is very simple. AI does some stuff very well that you cannot do otherwise. Quantum computing does some stuff you cannot do otherwise. If you put them together, what can they do that you cannot do with either of these technologies alone? So there's like a back and forth between them. One is you take the full quantum stack. There's hard problems that appear in developing, error correcting, writing quantum algorithms for a quantum computer. And sometimes human intuition is not good enough or the problems are too hard. And as in any AI for science application, there's a large field of research where AI, classical AI, is being applied to help with these hard problems arising in the quantum stack, you know? The other way around is sometimes AI has to solve some problems, some scientific problems, some other scientific problems. But as we all know, AI works on data, right? It needs data to be trained on. And some of this data might require a quantum computer to be obtained in the first place. So that's another arrow. And there was a science fiction arrow, which still is a valid research direction. You assume you have a quantum computer, fully scalable, you know, it's 2000 whatever, and you assume that backend exists, and you imagine, if I had a robot that has a quantum computer on board, what could it do? You know, does it explore the universe faster? Does it solve this and that problem faster? What does quantum intelligence look like? And actually, the first papers on quantum and AI were in that space, but they were like in principle theory papers. In practice, you do mostly what I said in the beginning. You know, you take whatever technology works and you throw it to solve a problem, or you see what problems you can solve with these synergies of these technologies in a given, decade, like say the 2020s. These are the technologies we have. We have scientific roadmaps for both of them, fleshed out roadmaps for the next 5 years. What problems can we attack?
Amazing, thank you so much. I think what I'm going to do is we're going to move on to Günseli, but what we will do after is maybe take this opportunity and this platform to maybe do like a bit of demystifying, because I really want to ask you about the Willow chip announcement and the claims that were made in that. I'm incredibly lucky, right? Because I'm not from a quantum background. My background is art, AI, writing. And when something like the Willow chip comes out, I can just go on Slack and just ask like one of the world's best computer scientists to be like, what should you read? And get like some amazing feedback. I'm like incredibly privileged. But as I said, one of the things that Moth want to do is to, speculate on how these emergent technologies will, how they might impact culturally, how they are impacting culturally, and how the underlying physics is received culturally, and especially in a context that is, contemporary culture, something that GAF specialises in so well. And this is exactly, as I said, the reason we brought Günseli on board. Now, I'm going to quickly give Günseli a serious intro, because she is actually a serious artist and researcher who's based in London. Seamless transition. She is contributing editor at Days magazine and co-curator of Cybernetic Serendipity Towards AI, which took place at London's ICA in 2024. She has appeared in talks and panels at the Architecture Association, BFI, LAS Art Foundation, Somerset House, Unsound Festival, many more. Her writing has appeared in multiple outlets such as Dazed Magazine, Spike Art, and 032C. And I'm going to hand over to Günseli now, and she's going to spend 10 minutes telling us about her researching progress so far with Moth, and then we're going to have a bit more of an informal conversation about that. Over to you.
Okay, challenge accepted. Well, thank you so much for having me. Thank you all for being here. Yes, as Declan mentioned, I was tasked with the ever so easy job of speculating what a quantum culture might look like. This kind of builds and it's kind of forms part of my ongoing practice of internet folklore, which explores the cultural impacts of emerging technologies and myths embedded within those systems. So what initially struck me about the story of quantum, and I use the word story very lightly here because there's a lot of competing stories, is the increased media attention around quantum this year as the official International Year of Quantum. We know why. It's 100 years since the first quantum revolution, but this has undeniably generated a lot of media attention, institutional attention, and cultural production in the form of artworks and funding. In short, there's a lot of hype. It's the hype industrial complex. Some of this comes from tech corporations themselves, while others are media misreadings of what is admittedly a very complex phenomena, all of which affect the way conversations around quantum are diffused within culture, which also impacts capital in a sort of recursive cycle. Some of these takes are truthful to the scientific principles, others less so. However, what initially struck me as a point of focus is a theme that anyone who set foot in Glastonbury or California can probably relate to, and that is quantum woo. Where did this woo come from, and why has it been such a persistent association throughout history? Well, it turns out that the mysticism behind the woo actually dates back to the first quantum revolution. I was very pleased to find that Niels Bohr, whose coat of arms you will see at some point in this slideshow, features the yin-yang symbol. And that's a breakdown with the quantum tunneling diagrams, actually. It's very satisfying. Heisenberg was also very interested in Indian philosophy. Wolfgang Pauli, Nobel Prize winner, whose bookshelf will also appear at some point, has a bookshelf stacked with loads of mystic texts. He also spent a big portion of his life sending letters back and forth with Carl Jung, where they would exchange dreams. So there seems to be this kind of intuitive crossover, and I was very interested to kind of find out why. I guess fast forward to the late 60s, 70s, early 80s, and we see this story kind of crop up again of quantum, especially quantum theory, more on that later, quantum theory kind of mingling with these mystic ideas. They seem like there's something there, basically. Most of this comes from a group called the Fundamental Physics Group, the hippies, who will show up at some point. And basically these people, so after the World Wars, they realized that there's not that much demand anymore around like quantum education, so the funding kind of gets stripped, is the story. And you find yourself with a bunch of very overqualified and underemployed scientists who converge right at the cusp of the countercultural movement. These scientists, all of them became countercultural figures in their own rights, and because quantum still at that time was still, I guess, like a kind of underground, like it was a weird subject in the scientific community. One of the only places that would host them, apart from the University of Berkeley, California, which is where they were teaching, was the Esalen Institute. Anyone who's familiar with the Esalen Institute will know that it is a hotbed of New Age thinking. And I guess because this was the birth of the Institute at the time, this kind of balloons, and I guess what we're seeing nowadays is a downstream of that within culture. So again, going back to the Glastonbury, going back to the California, I had a friend the other day who showed me these quantum beads that got gifted to him in the 90s. There seems to be a persistent narrative in any such way. So the group were particularly concerned with Bell's theorem, originally proven by scientist John Stuart Bell in 1964, which stipulates that quantum objects that had once interacted would retain some strange link or connection, even after they had moved arbitrarily far apart from each other. Bell used words like non-locality and entanglement to describe this result, and the idea put into motion Bell's theorem, which rejected classical physics' mechanical and fragmented worldview, instead seeing connections and correspondences among everything in the world, at least on a micro scale. Pseudo-mystical packaging can be sensed all over culture today. That's so frequently projected onto quantum. So from the POV of corporations, you both mentioned the Google Willow chip, which was unveiled this past January, which led Google's Harmit Nevin to announce that it offers substantial proof that we live in a multiverse. This caused a big stir in the quantum scene, simply because it's not true. The claim relies on the many worlds interpretation, which, if you're familiar with any kind of basic quantum, is one of many, many interpretations. Others include the Copernican, superdeterminism, and so on. So as far as the narrative construction goes, how far away is it really from hippies selling you quantum oil on TikTok to the tune of psychedelic 5-step guides to quantum jumping, or teenagers claiming to have reality shifted into the Harry Potter franchise? Statements like Google's offer a nice marketing tool for the current scientific establishment, but it's bad for science in the long term. They fan the flames of woo, they distract conversations into sensationalist territory and away from any meaningful discourse, hazy terms that sound good enough to draw dollars, or alternative spiritualities masking themselves as rational inquiry. Within pop culture, we also seem to have a very pointed focus on the many worlds interpretation. So you can think like Marvel, Black Mirror. They use it as a kind of narrative lube to, one, make stuff look cool, and two, it sells. It's a great plot device. This is all a long way of saying that there's narrative construction on both sides of the coin, aka folklore. All of this is to say there's a number of ways this has had effects across culture. From the way young people speak about the vibe of quantum, to the words that get soaked into the wider cultural lexicon, to consumer goods sold to us by grifters, to capital itself. I want to focus on the last one here for a moment. So there's a geopolitical arms race happening right now around quantum tech, mostly focused on encryption. China is investing the most, shortly followed by Europe and then the US. Last month, headlines announced that China achieves quantum supremacy with a new chip 1 quadrillion times faster than the most powerful quantum computer. This arms race is fueled by fear, so who's going to get there first? Who's going to invest more? There's lots of investments in searching for applications, which kind of creates like a bubbled effect. And just to kind of draw a definition before we kind of go into this Q&A portion as well between quantum theory and quantum technologies. Konstantinos very kindly helped me define this succinctly yesterday. So theory is the explanation, technology is the use. You don't need to understand what quantum theory actually is to build quantum technologies or to use them. There's no consensus on what quantum theory is in the scientific community anyway, hence the multitude of interpretations out there. I think this is important to consider when thinking about quantum culture in particular, because so much of the institutional focus is on the theory, which has been around pretty much since the very beginning. There's no shade to that. I find that side of it personally very interesting. Quantum theory is based on a hyperdimensional view of the world where many different realities can exist at the same time. However, there is a crucial caveat to that in that we as humans, we're binary creatures. We operate on a classical framework. So we can't understand or have access to any of these, to all these realities at the same time. Which one we're in isn't up to us. So in order to fully and truly understand quantum theory and its applications within culture, we need to modify the grammar of our understanding of reality. We need to think in a way that is quantum. Yet our constructs of reality right now and how we interact with the world around us is still modeled on a Newtonian understanding. This is empirical, backed by decades of sophisticated experiments and hard math. So obviously it's a big task to remodel our sense of reality and do away with this entire modern Western paradigm. It would kind of require us to go all the way back to the earliest Western philosophers like Aristotle and Plato and basically go with Heraclitus and scrap them and essentially work our way back up the chain, which is obviously not in capitalism's best incentives. So yeah, maybe that's a good point to stop for the Q&A.
Amazing. Thank you so much. That was fantastic. Yeah, a round of applause. So I spoke to Konstantinos and Günseli at Somerset House, where Moth's offices are, and was doing a bit of prep for this. And one of the first things I thought, well, it's probably the best question to ask off the top was, is quantum the new paradigm? And I was met with a resounding no from both. And yeah, hopefully we'll be able to unpack that a little bit. But Günseli, I was just wondering, you mentioned quantum physics and the shift to quantum physics from Newtonian physics, and we mentioned as well let's put it this way: quantum physics compared with Newtonian physics, or cybernetics compared with a post-cybernetics. Or binary compared to non-binary. Now, one of the things that you've kind of identified and picked up and run with quantum theory is that weirdness, right? That quantum weird. Do we both? I guess it's a question for both of you. Is your intuition that there is a break or a gap between the weirdness of the physics and the tech? And do we think that weirdness, that unintuitiveness can survive the scale up into application? Either one of you can take it first.
I think that's why it was so important for me to just do a really quick outline of quantum theory versus quantum technologies just then, because as you've told me before as well, like to build a technology, or to use a technology, you don't need to know the theory necessarily behind it. I mean, as far as the theory goes, quantum is like very weird, right? And will there ever be a time when we can truly understand quantum theory? I'll leave that to Konstantinos to explain. But as far as it goes, I mean, with the technology side, obviously that like future shock plays a value. There's this great Marshall McLuhan quote, which is like, today's mysticism is tomorrow's science. So essentially, like, this isn't specific to quantum either. I think like anything which kind of seemingly exists out of like a realm of understanding is kind of pegged with like the label of weird. We've seen this with AI. We've seen this since like the very beginnings of like a train coming out of a like a cinema screen.
Well, this is what Venkatesh spoke about, right? The historical model of Labatutian, Lovecraftian, and Ballardian phases of how we relate to technology. Konstantinos, can we do application weird? Can we keep that weirdness?
So some problems even being, excluding the problems that are about simulating quantum systems, some hard problems, classically hard, even being efficiently solvable via quantum computation in a non-obvious way, like for some reason you can reduce it to a quantum algorithm that solves a weird problem in topology or some pure math or some graph theory thing that was not obvious at all. Like, why is a quantum computer able to do some problem that has to do with untangling strands and knots and stuff? Why does it have anything to do with quantum? That's very strange. It's very, very weird. However, this weirdness is, you know, the more of an expert you are, the more you appreciate it. But, you know, even at face value, it's just weird. So even if you just take that, it's weird. Then, so that's from a scientific point of view, you know, like a research scientist in Google or Quantinuum or IBM. That's where you would be coming from. But if you are someone who is coming from the arts or from culture, who would be encountering quantum via a company like Moth, for example, they would be encountering a new technology, and they would be trying to see what they can do with it that is novel in the creative spaces, because that's what we have seen artists do. They just grab whatever new technology pops up.
So people are the weird ones, right?
Yeah, I think. So what is weird? Weird is something that is recognizable. It's not totally random, so it's meaningless. It's not totally familiar, so it's also meaningless. It's a sweet spot of complex but familiar. It's this criticality point where it's interesting but novel enough. So in an analogous way, where in a space of computational problems, quantum unlocks some paths to solve some problems, and you can move in the territory of computational problems, also in the concept space of culture and arts, having any new technology opens up new paths of exploration where you can play with new concepts and so on. So it's where you transition between, I want to understand quantum theory, what is going on? You transition between having to read a book about it versus maybe you have a gadget to interact with it. And through the interactions, maybe you can build intuitions, and maybe 5 generations down the line, there is no woo anymore, because it's like, yeah, sure, it's all an untangled thing. Maybe we won't have an interpretation figured out, maybe not. Maybe that's impossible in principle. Some interpretations are, in principle, unfalsifiable, you know, because they just match with every experimental observation. So it's just philosophy after that. But it would be very exciting, for example, if in the future there are experiments using quantum technologies that can falsify some interpretations. That would be amazing.
This this kind of process of like a potential naturalization of an understanding of physics into society is actually something that I know that Dunn and Rabi, a design duo based in New York, are doing some research on, that's going to be released at some point this year, that's called Quantum Common Sense, that's about, you know, what happens when those ideas are kind of downloaded into the common sense of society. Like, what does culture look like then? And you spoke to Dunn and Rabi, or to Anthony, I know Günseli, but which just brings me on to a question of, like, maybe if you could tell us about like some of the most interesting kind of conversations, or the most interesting, because your research methodology is interview-led, right? So you've done like a ton of interviews for this, and yeah, maybe you could just share some of the more interesting, weird, kooky, fascinating things that you've managed to pick up along the way.
Oh gosh, that's a really hard question. But like, for context, that was like a lot of interviews. Yeah. So I think one of the most surprising things, because I got like momentarily very fixated on this kind of like the mysticism, quantum theory connection. And so I guess it also depends what kind of quantum science, like what kind of scientist you're speaking to, right? Because what I found was when I was speaking to the theorists themselves, they were being very open. I mean, one surprising thing was just like, why, like my question was like, why do you think there's this kind of connection? It seems to, appear in the narrative kind of constantly.
Between Taoism and quantum, right?
Yes,
That
yes.
connection, okay.
And like what was kind of fed back was, like also if you go into quantum theory, chances are you're going to be quite an existential person. So that was that.
I mean, yeah, one of the things that, that I was wondering as well is, maybe we could spend a couple of minutes actually on the Willow chip announcement. I feel like it's a really good point in question, and I know that, one of the things that I maybe want to get your read on, Günseli, is like, well, firstly, some of the claims made, but actually maybe also the aesthetics used as well, which I find absolutely fascinating. And one of the things that's like that you found, I know, in your interviews is like the different timelines that have been said to you about when will quantum technologies reach maturity have like wildly like differed. This has been like such a confusing point because it just it differs depending on who you ask, and then Google come and make these claims like very like 10 years, which then got changed to 20 years. So maybe Konstantinos, if you could like just unpack what your reaction was to the Willow chip announcement and the things that were said in it.
Okay, so there were two announcements actually under the Willow announcement. One was demonstrating that quantum error correction works. That's something you have to do to suppress the errors to make a quantum computer work and scale. Google is not the only one who has achieved that, but they have the biggest marketing budget, so you hear about it first. Also, the experiment that they became famous for, the quantum supremacy experiment, basically is about demonstrating, it's flexing, right? It's flexing that you can do something that you cannot do classically. But this something is, in quotes, stupid something. So you say, I don't know what program to run. I'm going to randomly sample a bunch of programs and run all of them. And you cannot do this classically because they're all quantum programs. So you should see this as a benchmark. So when you see the headline saying, we solved the problems that you a problem that you cannot solve classically, you don't actually solve a problem if you just run a random programs, right? But it's a benchmark. It's a demo. It's like something you have to do to even be relevant. So Quantinuum has done that. Other companies have tried to do the same experiment. The Chinese team has done it also. But beyond that, I think it's quite interesting that in the year of quantum, this year, actually quantum computers from these big companies, including Google and Quantinuum, are at the stage of development and maturity that they can finally start to solve actual problems, like simulating dynamics in materials, for example.
Do you, and Günseli, what was your, how did you receive it, like the aesthetics that were used? Like, do you have a read on that? Because like it was like, here is the, it was like a David Attenborough. It was like Blue Planet, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think Schrödinger.
Schrödinger's baby.
Yeah, Schrödinger's baby. No, I think there's I mean, you're the expert for like kind of quantum aesthetics, but I think from my POV, like I think there's a lot of quantum cringe going around. I think, yeah. That's my answer.
I mean, that is often the reaction to like, you learn a little bit about quantum physics and then you learn a little bit more and then that's kind of where your brain goes, right? If you want to learn a little bit about quantum physics that won't make you have a meltdown, Carlo Rovelli's great. His book Helgoland is kind of like you want to learn a bit in an understandable way, particularly about the different interpretations of quantum physics. Yeah, that's an amazing place to start. And the last thing I guess I would like to add, maybe to also add some like tangible personality traits, is that when applied to AI, for instance, we can see that some of the quantum native kind of personality traits, as I just said, coming out. Some of those are that it's incredibly good at working with smaller data sets. Gets a lot more out of it. You know, you don't have to scale up the compute, scale up the power. It offers a... No, I'm not saying that that's what's going to happen, because we have seen the way that technology is developed, and we have seen, you know, it usually falls along other lines of vested interests, but there is the potential for affordances that don't rely on just increasing data set size, which would include, you know, scraping people's IP, and it doesn't include just like beefing out the GPUs that you're using. The other thing that I find fascinating, this is like the thing that I really hang on to, and this is a kind of consensus that's being reached, is that with a type of machine learning architecture that leverages quantum dynamics, one of the things we start to see is that this model is better at incorporating divergence it detects in its data set into its output. What I mean by that is Hito Steyerl has this thesis of the mean image, okay? Of the fact that AI is a smoothing force on a data set, is a force of aggregation. And what we are beginning to see is that quantum dynamics, when integrated into a hybrid classical system, that's what it is at this point, right? It's not straight up raw quantum computing, but when we integrate quantum dynamics, we notice that we can, you know, establish a system that incorporates outliers, minorities, anomalies into its data set in a much more natural and dynamic system. Now that is like a vibe, a personality trait I find kind of interesting. And these are the little sprouts we're seeing coming through. Unfortunately, I've got 4 zeros in front of my face, which means we are out of time. But I would like to, from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much for coming out here and giving us a mise-en-scene of quantum. Thank you so much.